Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you. I'm Katsuya. I'm a member of the editorial board of the Architecture Institute of the Japan. And also I'm an architect. I'm from Nikken Sekkei. Our team and your team collaborated in the National Stadium project, but although I'm not a member of that project. So today I'm very happy to hear your interview. Thank you.
Hello, my name is nice to meet you. My name is Genki from Takena Corporation, which is general construction company in Japan. And first of all, thank you for acceptance of our interview today. And we are very thrilled about hearing from you regarding the skyscrapers in relation to urban design. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And hi, I'm Takeshi, and I'm MEP engineer at ARAP. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Great.
So shall we jump right in?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the questions we have prepared, we're trying to ask some kind of specialized detailed questions, since this is a magazine that is already for architects.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
we're going to ask some questions based on the assumption that there is general knowledge about geometry
Okay.
for our readers. So the first question we have is about your thoughts on the urban city today.
Okay.
So I think it's a common knowledge for all of us that with technical improvements and change in lifestyles, we are really able to live wherever we want. And yet there is still a tendency to gather in cities, and after a certain point of density, you start to see skyscrapers. Now, perhaps because of the availability of the standardized curtain wall systems, you start to see very similar looking skyscrapers everywhere. The efficient construction logic and reasonable construction logic, and yet it creates a ubiquitous city. And you do talk about that. I think you use the word garbage urbanization to talk about the characterless visual chaos of the city. So I guess first we would like to, and on the other hand, the skyscrapers that have been proposed by the architects, they tend to be seen as viewers as very iconic and a very strong, bold presence. And there's a contrast between what you're building and what we see in the city today. So our first question is, what are your thoughts on the current state of the urban cities and skyscrapers in particular? And as architects and urbanists, what are the issues that we should be focusing on and taking on in the 21st century?
Yeah, I mean, the phenomenon of the urban renaissance should be noted, where in the 20th century, in the mid 20th century, and some decades on either side, there was a big suburbanization move and an abandonment of historic cities and centers. They were shrinking, and both residential units as well as workspaces, factories, as well as administrative headquarters and such buildings moved into the green field, and because they didn't need at that period, due to the, let's say, socioeconomic structure and technology structure of that era, they didn't need to communicate so intensely because this era couldn't absorb a lot of innovations. So there was a lot about optimizing a number of fixed designs which we've been running for decades, and you can build large hierarchical bureaucracies, whether they would be corporate or sometimes even state-owned, was not much difference. And to have a kind of top-down hierarchical allocation of the division of labor, and a lot of people were still locked into the assembly line. And there wasn't much in terms of research, development, marketing, finance, that would now characterize what's happening in the city. So those people who were locked in greenfield assembly lines or bureaucracies shifting paper along, they've been released to more creative knowledge work. And for that, though, if you work on projects and everybody is working on innovations of one kind or another, that needs an enormous amount of communication. And that also meant that these big bureaucracies have been outsourcing and broken up into network organizations, a lot of startup companies, integration with the university. And that is a totally different pattern of production, much more productive. But that generates a different kind of city, the city of incubation clusters, knowledge economy clusters, and various sectors. You can see engineering and architecture here in London, and design in the area where we're sitting, close by all the lawyers and the finance, and that's also required because we will have lawyers making 100 contracts per year and more. We then have photographers and all sorts of media companies in London in these clusters, and they have to work together and be close together, and we need to move between work with a network of consultants and collaborators. We want to go to universities and see exhibitions and update what we're working on, because that's all very dynamic, and that's what we need the city for. And that at a certain density, as you say, this could also go vertical, where maybe at the top you're residents and you just come down into the work environments. And the implications for me for the tower typology, let's start there on the architectural side, is for any building, you suddenly have these deep buildings, large floor plates, and breaking open the section to connect between floor plates because of the achieving intervisibility, inter-awareness, fluidity of roaming around and having all these meeting spaces instead of people just sitting in their offices, certainly not cellular offices. So the tower typology, which is still sometimes dominates of a shaft where all the floors remain separate, and on each floor the core is obstructing intervisibility, and then you slice up even into single offices. That becomes a very inefficient and bad model, because you could come into a tower and maybe it's even a headquarters and there are thousands of people working together, but you never meet, never see anybody. You disappear in an elevator into a core, and 8 hours later you come out and you've met 5 people, and you're not aware what's going on left, right, center, above and below. So our idea of it, first of all, is not necessarily going to towers, but having deep volumes, sponge-like projects with atria and connections. And if you have several blocks, bridges. So my big theme is atria and bridges to connect more and more tissue. And we have built such master plan of deep volumes with bridges connecting in Singapore. But then you should also mix in hotels and residences. So we don't want sleeping cities and commuting, because you want to be agile and stay late for dinner parties, for exhibition openings, and you don't want to kind of commute forever. Then you will be kind of cut off. So it's all the dynamics of the knowledge economy can be accommodated. When we go high, we bring along the atria, we bring along bridges, and we also try to avoid cores. So that's hard. We haven't built, or we split the core, like the Lisa Tower, for instance. We have the Morpheus Hotel, but the idea of an open atrium and panoramic elevators. Similar, we've done it at the Bank of Iraq. So to maintain that intervisibility, inter-awareness, to maximize communication, because the whole point of bringing 10,000 people into a site is that they aware of what they're doing, they potentially to collaborate, at least to exchange information, and to garner the synergy potentials of having an organization. It's for us, we have 500 people in this company, also very important. We need to actively build platforms, digital or physical, and event structures to allow people to be aware of what's going on, to use each other as resource, and to remain aware of the new tools we're developing. And if you don't do that continuously, because if you disappear in a chamber and try to concentrate on something for 3 months, 6 months, you don't get clued in with upsetting new information or potentials of increasing your productivity, you basically will waste your time. And so we need to, in my phrase, I use the phrase, you have to calibrate what everybody's doing with what everybody else is doing in a relevant network. And that it goes beyond the firm. That's all the network of consultants, but also, as I said, schools of architecture, exhibition venues, biennales, all of that needs to be happening. And that's the vision. And now these towers, therefore, should come close to each other. They should actually have visual between towers, bridges between towers, and so on and so forth, so that to actually make the network society, I'm calling it the post-forest network economy.
I've also seen you use the word interior urbanism and implementing the megavoid inside.
Yes.
For us, how does this interior urbanism that we're creating, how does that connect to the existing external urbanism? I imagine, as you said, the higher and higher the building goes up, it's very difficult to avoid the disconnect between the
it gets more isolated, but that's why it's important to have the atrium, so that you get, when you move up, you kind of see in the panoramic elevator, you see of what happens at different levels, and you should intersperse sky lobbies. And so you get a sense, oh, there's something going on, maybe I should stop, jump out, or I go up quickly and come down and have a look. So that's important. Also, you're thinking of coordinating. What I love in Hong Kong, there's this kind of datum where everybody's connecting to these pedestrian bridges. And that's extremely helpful to have a second layer of connectivity, not only the streets, where you also sometimes often interrupted by traffic and if you wait across the street. And all of these little delays, they increase friction. So that at the end of your day, the 8 hours or 10 hours, whatever you spend, you have missed a number of things and you had less meetings, which could have advanced your understanding. You've able to do less, you're wasting time for this lunch meeting and moving on to another meeting. And that's all adds up. This friction is hugely costly because it means that you lose out to competition, or your product gets launched 3 months later, 6 months later. The value of which is dwarfs the investment cost into these bridges, atria, and new buildings. So I think the real estate cost, although it's quite high, and the land cost, for potent knowledge economy organizations, it's a relatively small factor. So it always pays to invest more because what the real cost is the salaries of IT companies. The salaries are, and then the running costs are soon overtaking the capital costs, but then the salary costs. And then on the benefit side, the loss of productivity if you have dysfunctional premises, that's very serious. And we sense that here we're looking to upgrade our premises, to build ourselves, to find a new premises, because we're too fragmented here. So that's that's a lot of friction. So it makes it harder for me to be fully aware of what everybody's doing. And that goes not only for me. If 500 people all getting less information about potential connections, resources, that friction adds up and becomes a problem.
So if I could go back to what we should be focusing on when we're approaching skyscrapers, I understand it's in the knowledge economy and the creative work we're doing, we need to really focus on, I think you mentioned it, the communicative capacity of the building. And I with the megavoid that you implement, I guess the first question is, often it has a very big visual impact that kind of is almost visible from the outside as well. And I'm not sure, we did make these questions and we talked about how iconic a lot of these buildings are seen and almost futuristic from certain people. And relating to the Bank of Iraq that you talked about earlier, I think that was the only project where I found you actually used the word iconic. And I'm wondering,
I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, maybe I used it.
Is it a byproduct?
Yeah, this is absolutely to be seen as a byproduct. So it's not something we would emphasize and in isolation as a separate task to give that building an image. I mean, that's sometimes, unfortunately, the way clients think, or the way it kind of is superficial, basically consuming the whole morphology and the medium through which you should organize a social process. To consume that and give that over to the production of an image is really absurd. But it's based on the misunderstanding, or nobody understands that you could do so much more with shaping the space for social interaction purposes, for the productivity purposes, and that in the end there's an outcome which has a unfamiliar first physiognomy, a look and feel, which becomes conspicuous because we have a rigorous process and we not just repeating stereotypes, and that's what delivers something conspicuous. And that side effect is also welcome because it signals to everybody, oh, there's something special going on. Maybe there's some special organizations who have some clue. And oftentimes our buildings, even if they're multi-tenant buildings, they collect firms of a certain ilk and character with an innovative thrust, with a certain, and they become relevant to each other nearly by default because they all selected this building. In Moscow, for instance, that was the case. So we're getting some of synergy clusters by this kind of strange selection of those have to have the means, and you need to have a certain potency and etc. So yeah, it's definitely a side effect, and that was already positive and signaled something which is also then maybe attracting talent, attracting other companies. They're curious about what's going on in this building, and then they find maybe we should join. Maybe there's something which we can connect into. There's a synergy cluster we can connect into. And but this is the individual building. What's very important, of course, is that this is not one building, but whole groups of building, clusters of building. And there we have to admit, or we have to realize that planning policy becomes important. And that has been a huge barrier to generating these clusters fully, because these planning regimes and the allocation of, let's say, program uses to plots, the restrictions on quantity and program types, all too much prescribed, then doesn't allow the agility of various firms and also providers who want to, for instance, throw in a great boutique hotel or restaurant or club or conferencing center or something, or into the mix. They have no freedom because the land allocation is bureaucratically prescribed. And that's why I've been critical about planning processes. They're not agile enough. They're too prescriptive, and it should be market-led. And the market process should leave it totally free to a developer to pick up a site, to find the sites for their purposes with the right neighborhoods and neighbors, and plug into and then emerging and evolve a synergy cluster. So from this and the site, the owners should also be able to kind of curate something uninhibited by any political prerogatives. And that's a big problem. Finally, so if you would have a much more market-led emergence of synergy clusters, then you would know that somebody who's located their project here because they want to be close to many other things. So they belong to many other things. They're functioning together with many other things, other institutions, whether they're owned by them or not. And then the architect comes in and there's a rationality of co-location and affiliation and connection and collaboration. And that can then be expressed by the architect who would formally affiliate not only spatially and organizationally, but also with the look and feel, and let's say the semiological encoding will emphasize the deeper connections, the remote connections, and what in the categorization of the spaces would you could have an involving let's say spatial visual language which is expressive of what you encounter, and that would overcome that kind of garbage sale element where at the moment it's very disorienting. You can't really, everybody hires their own architect. The discipline is totally fragmented. You could have a minimalist next to a kind of neo-postmodernist, to a neo-classicist, to a kind of high-tech modernist, to a parametricist. I mean, and they would all just do in a unique piece, which has in their own, probably, except for parametrism, tectonism, they have no means and awareness and ethos of connecting up and resonating. Even if the world's let free and let loose by planners who unfortunately now have their own kind of prescription. They suddenly want everything to be built in brick, or they're overemphasizing, let's say, environmental issues and imposing very small windows, which is in the end, in prohibiting and inhibiting the productivity of these spaces and the quality of spaces. So that's the problem. So the city image, which we are currently having, has two component problems. One is political, lack of degrees of freedom, but the other one is disciplinary, lack of coherence and sophistication and debate also in the discipline. So the discipline is incompetent. But the problem is that if you have a kind of paralyzing and overly prescriptive politics, it also then disincentivizes that upgrading, the agility we were promoting to do things, if in the end you're not being let do it, or you get away with you don't have to. But even if you develop the skill, you couldn't use it. So there's a kind of paralysis, which in the end means that our discipline is failing on the urban scale, very much. On the architectural scale, we can be partially show advances and do individual buildings which have merit and point to beyond themselves also. But on an urban scale, we have a kind of situation where the discipline is, I would say, intellectually and creatively, on the one hand, paralyzed by politics, but also bankrupt in its capacities.
And does that relate to the incoherence of the styles of the?
It relates to that, yeah. But also it's not only the incoherence, but it's also the lack of sophistication. So many architects are quite happy to work in ways which you could have worked 80 years ago, 100 years ago. In the mid-20s, we have modernism and this kind of asymmetric ponderated composition, and some people are still doing that now, stripping bare. And there's an element, yes, you can declutter, which is sometimes okay, of minimalist kind of suppression of redundant detail, let's say. But I mean, if we're working like this in ways we could have worked 100 years ago, and then others work in ways that could have been done 50 years ago, one really wonders why do we have a discipline, an academic theory-led, maybe science challenged discipline? We actually don't. We have a craft. We have individual personalities which are unaccountable. We don't take each other to account because everyone says, well, that's my style, that's my program. Maybe I'm justifying by talking about green issues, which, are engineering business, and we should take for granted instead of letting that take up all the airspace, because that's probably the case because they don't have much to say about their choices, because they work according to prescribed formula. It's really, let's say, it's intellectually very poor, but this is also happening because our culture of discourse is very polite, and people just don't have to expose themselves to criticism in the field, and they don't.
And I think you speak about the implementation of simulation methodology as a way of it's something that is available now.
Yeah, I mean, look,
now.
Of course. Well, we are a relatively small drop in the ocean organization. There's a few spots where the movement evolved, AA in London, Columbia University in the early 90s, into Harvard. And recently, Tongji University, Philip Yuan, so let's say the Paramerism, Tectonism, ETH, some universities, small firms. We are the mothership in terms of a larger company. We have a number of research teams, but of course, the research component in our company is 10% of our staff, maybe over 50 researchers or something. That's not much, plus some of these PhDs and small groups and smaller firms, that's a drop in the ocean. I mean, if we wanted to really take seriously advancing the discipline out of this craft-like, I would say, intellectually, creatively bankrupt state of paralysis, we need everybody to continue. And you know what happened to universities and biennales, they're in absolute dissolution in terms of a disciplinary progress agenda. I mean, they've been taken over, they've been usurped by kind of woke ideology. They only care about marginal groups and social justice and maybe some green issues and think what the actual development pressures of a metropolis they don't have nothing to do with. They think any firm who is doing large things and big projects is fallen. The institutions have been taken over by left-wing woke radicals who can only protest and have nothing to offer. They're mired of the constructive. They have nothing to offer. They're mired in some anti-capitalist socialist dreams, and they can do nothing. And so all schools are affected. All elite schools. I don't know Japan. So they fall away. They fall to the wayside. Any form of discussion or debate, any conference is just totally swamped by green issues, which bleaches out everything else. All the biennales, Venice Biennale, Chicago Biennale are totally taken over. There's not a single piece of architecture invited, no firm. I mean, we used to be on every biennale in several pavilions. For the last kind of 15 years, no architect has ever been invited who is more than 5 people and isn't primarily academically based. I mean, and that's basically, I call it self-annihilation of the discipline. And that's why on the one hand, and then the architects who are still working, they have no forum, no critical debate, no university backup. And they're descended into a craft, and our forums are descending into some kind of woke ideology. So basically, the discipline has disappeared. The end of architecture has happened. It's a fait accompli for now.
I'd like to steer the conversation back to how skyscrapers are approached
Sure.
in this office and for you. And one thing I'd like to ask about is the agent-based parametrics technology. I understand that's a research design project that you've been working on with students. And
not only with students, we actually have an in-house research team. We're running thousands of agents. We have serious capacities. And we've built this. It took a while, number of years. I mean, that's why it's very important to connect to university. Because in a firm where you have 3 weeks for competition, you will never be able to expand the repertoire, to build new capacities on the job. So we need to work with the universities. I've been teaching for over 25 years at the AA. We have 18 months with a large number of students to formulate ideas, to sketch, to illustrate. That's one step. Then I moved on to PhDs. I've kind of had a PhD group at Vienna University, researching, deepening this, building tools, and then moving the next step into a professional research team here, building more capacity. And it's still in the beta version. It's still not in full flow, working also with Bureau Huppelt in the kind of communication. And we can run now these simulations for, social functionality. We can for headquarters in particular, corporate headquarters, we can take a whole kind of staff, thousands of people ordered into departments, into functions, understand how they network with each other, hierarchy levels, and then see how we might distribute them to maximize encounters across relevant encounter types. We want maybe across departments, between hierarchical levels, intra-team, and then where they would encounter, there should be props to convert encounters into conversations. And if you had a campus like, a project like a Google campus, 25,000 people, maybe 300 meeting zones, 50 entrances, nobody has a clue. I mean, there isn't no competency whatsoever to organize. We could do it one way or another, and nobody had any sense why this would be better than that. So we're totally agnostic, we're totally incompetent. And you can, ask, how would if David Chipperfield deal with something like this? a few doodles and say that would be nice. I mean, that's crazy because the productivity loss, you know, not searching the space properly and having these efficiencies and flourish, which is also means in the end everybody is more happy, because what makes you happy is having had a great meeting and a few more good meeting and an idea and a collaborative team. But if you know, if that's not facilitated, then this whole investment is down the, you know, is a misallocation, a malinvestment. So in towers, again, I said towers aren't necessarily always the best typology, and they need to come together very closely, and they need to be networked with bridges, and have to be always, you know, penetrable through atria. You know, and so I'm not necessarily advocating towers. The falling back on towers is also kind of default. Yes, I understand that sometimes for city landmarking and so on is interesting and has a role of orienting people and putting cities on the map. And they're like big buildings, they can have afford a lot of internal richness, let's say. But I think I wouldn't, you know, super tall towers are meaningless in many ways, or the wrong, you know, the costs per floor, they increase exponentially for no good reason. So I'm not a kind of,
It's not your favorite.
you have to kind of think carefully about, I mean, of course, if you have a constrained site and you want in the middle of Hong Kong, there's only one way to go.
Yeah, and often these high-rise typologies, it's corporations, and it connects to, I think, what you were talking about earlier, these complex programs with a lot of different teams and relationships between companies. So I imagine the agent-based parametric semiology can be applied for.
Yeah, we primarily developed for these because although it would also apply to retail, but also like retail to be intermixed with work environments, you know, lunch places, etc. It primarily developed for the corporate realm because that's the most, let's say, intricate and also the most valuable if you'd get it right.
Valuable in terms of the effects of
the productivity, economic value of getting this right is very high in the kind of high tech knowledge economy or financial sector as well. You know, you can see it with the salaries. If the average salary is $300,000 you better make sure that they know what's going on and that they're properly collaborating and they're properly present. So that's, but also, I mean, if you compare it to retail or residential, retail, you more or less parallelize. Everybody has their own purposes. Okay, they should be fulfilled. You should quickly find the right shops and not waste time. And maybe also meet for lunch with somebody, that's fine. But you only come together because you use the same facilities and they don't have to be repeated, etc. So is residential. Unfortunately, I think also have residential models which are more intricate, where you actually have a community, where you live with people you're stimulated by and share ideas with. And you know, now it is not happening because it's just a random group of people and all you want is privacy and not get disturbed. But that shouldn't be. So that's why I like things like startup homes, where you curate. That's what we're building tools for also. It's just a recent article you can look at. Kind of gamified incubation platform for synergy clusters, corporate, but also residential, retail. So, but these are integrated lives. Let's say parallel lives in residential, in retail, integrated lives. So people coming in, they're not only sharing a facility, they're looking for each other. And that has another constraint, is another sense of interest and of coping with that. Because you can't isolate, oh, this person finds a shop and that's it. And this person, I look at 5 different types and they find the place they want to be efficiently. But we need to look at these people have to find each other, but with different degrees of urgency. And there's this kind of interesting situational variety. So you have individual concentration moments, you have roaming and freely in lunch situations, evening parties, a large group coming together, listening to a kind of a speech, a kind of presentation, and then breaking into smaller teams. So the situation, the diagram, social diagram of what you experience through your day is very diverse and varied, and it needs to be. So it's not only that's part of the quality. So the versatility or diversity of encounter types and experience types, which is offered by the building, always at the right place with the right people, in the right moment, maximizing synergy potentials. So that's a way more interesting problem. And we can also see that there's a whole consultancy industry, namely management consultancy, team building, internal corporate culture upgrading consultancy, that firms, and I've noticed that I've been working with this topic for many years, any large corporation, they have continuously internal management steering teams and processes and external consultants, change management. And that's what we need to feed into. So our tools and facility management they have facility management teams as well. So working with that and not just sitting there, oh, the tower should be like this, and why don't you make a nice detail and and make a nice image. I mean, that's an absurd, let's say, waste of sure road to malinvestment.
So as you mentioned, I think there is this approach, unfortunately, to design skyscrapers as an object and have this separate facade design from what is actually happening on the inside. And this agent-based parametric semiology, that really resonates for us to understand that is how you create a space in such a complex dynamic that plays out. How does that eventually help to address, or does it eventually help to address the actual shape of the building? How do you go?
Yeah, well, it definitely does. So first of all, as I said, you probably need, and there's a great article by Rem Koolhaas called Bigness, and where he, so early on, there was a few kind of things which stick in my mind. Something like Christopher Alexander's "The City's Not a Tree," this kind of networking idea. Something like Bigness, where he said, if you have the big fat building, you get many more things which could connect with each other. If you put them all into a tower, there is very little connections, only neighboring things perhaps, but not. So deep fat and porous volumes would maximize, and using this three-dimensionality. If you do it only on one flat sheet, then it also gets distance. And if you fold into a sponge, you get more connection, visual and quicker. But these are models like Gary's he has this huge Facebook huge thing. Then Google, in a sense, interesting, they have these domes and have open platforms in a kind of deep volume, something which I tested out earlier. I developed such ideas at the GSD at the time for Google. So that's, and so the tower is, in a sense, not an instant competitor, but for instance, one thing for sure, which when it comes to towers, they need to be fat enough, or you have several and connect them. The core should never be in the middle, ideally. So Roger had the right intuition, pull out these cores, pull out the ducts on the outside and make the plate totally unencumbered, and put atriums in, like in Lloyd's, or later, even the Leadenhall Tower at least. You come in there, the plate is clear. And we've done that in our Henderson Tower. So it doesn't have an atrium. It has some double and triple light spaces and has a series of terraces to look back out. You see something happening on the top. You lift up at the bottom. There's a lot of bridges connecting in. But on the floor plate, we have pulled the core to the back. So when you step in, you have the plate like this, totally free and unencumbered with the glass and the open glass corner, and also looking across to the other towers. I mean, eventually the other towers you can see across and see something is happening on the penthouse there, something is, which may be of interest. In particular, if the tower was located to be next to our tower for a good reason, they wanted to be interactive. So that's the kind of topologies, and I've been articulating this for many, many years. The principles of, you have to take the core out. Circulation doesn't have to be tied in with a kind of structure. the exoskeleton is better and frees up the inside. Even occupiable surfaces, the floors, should not necessarily be doing work with respect to the overall stability of the tower. So that you can kind of take them out, add them, subtract them, punch through them. Every now and then, maybe a sky lobby connection of the skeleton rigid. That's enough. That's all you need. And then you have, occupiable surfaces fly in according to their own logic. And circulation drops in through voids or at the outside, wherever that is required. And these things should not be be encumbered with structural work. If you force circulation to structural work, you're already starting on the wrong foot. If you force occupiable surfaces to do structural overall stability work, you're already freezing up. So there's a number of simple principles. The other thing is, of course, that they also could be mixed use, and the structural logic itself is kind of bankrupt and outmoded, where you say that up to a certain tower you can do the whole tower. Is this kind of framework with a central core? Is it higher? You have to do outrigger. If it's higher, you do a tube. It's nonsense. There's an a priori that the whole tower has to have the same system. And you look at the diagram, you turn it upside down, it's the same diagram. So that already shows the absurdity of that. Structural absurdity. I mean, it's only because there's a hidden a priori of simplicity of thinking, simplicity of calculation, simplicity of fabrication, which is everything repetitive. It's the a priori. And once you eat that up and hide that a priori, you can publish a diagram which is still kind of published as saying this is the structural rationality of tower design. It's not. It's totally irrational given the contemporary, once you find element analysis, that makes no sense. Once you have, fabrication technologies and laser cutting and, the kind of repetition of elements is extremely inefficient and meaningless. So that's also important. So we need to challenge the engineering disciplines to come forth with true optimizing morphologies, but under our constraints of, not tying it in with circulation. Structural optimization, circulatory optimization comes in later, etc., and then work with them and be challenged. We're not engineers, but we have intuitions and we have shortcut tools. We can have quick topology optimization. We have quick mesh relaxation testing. If you want to do some tensor or shell structures, we can do that, and then we need engineers to come in but also challenge us early on, so that we get these optimization processes. And then, as I said, they nearly naturally are quite articulate, because they represent their order through their lawful differentiation, rather than through the kind of disorienting repetition or disorienting hatchet job of stitching up structure into an arbitrary architecturally designed diagram. That's not the way we should work. I mean, I have to admit, we've been working like this. By the way, what I'm saying, a lot of my challenge, our own projects are not always living up to these challenges.
But it's the ongoing challenge.
Exactly.
But it sounds like that given that we live in a knowledge economy, and we're popping up skyscrapers everywhere, these two are not, for the knowledge economy, skyscraper is not the best ideal form for building a creative working space. And this kind of trend we see in certain countries of just going as thin and high as much as possible, it's not really
it's not meaningful. It's absolutely not meaningful. I mean, and you can get a very high density. Paris proves that, with 7-8 story in the block conditions. If you pack in tightly enough, and like we showed in Singapore in our One North master plan, if you look at that, and it sometimes goes up also to maybe, I don't know, 100 meters or more, but the bulk of it is more in the kind of region of 30, 40, and deep volumes, etc., and as I said, bridges as well as voids in these buildings, and they are fabric. I mean, these used to be, you have these kind of industry clusters. They usually would be site outside somewhere, a big group of buildings, but then comes a big fence at a belt of car park, and then there's another of these clusters. So there are these isolated islands where you have to drive. I mean, you never communicate, or you have to drive from one to the other, and they don't connect properly. And that was the model. Let's say when we went to Singapore, there were some of these industry kind of clusters. They were like this, bunch of sheds, car park, fence along a highway, and we took this kind of landscape and we said, no, we make urban fabric. And you can walk from one building to another, and we bring in hotels and residences as well, and we're bringing retail, and every second line in our soft grid, which should follow the topography, is a pedestrian path. So this is the way we've kind of developed a kind of shift in this condition, and it's interesting that the flexibility of a kind of more 19th century block structure made sense. Rather than the modernist idea of making, because it had to be individual developers who come in and separately develop parcels. We started with a grid which had maybe 100 different block sizes, from quite narrow to quite deep. That's a better default, even if you don't know who's coming. To start with 100 different ones, so smaller companies can take smaller blocks, larger ones. It's better than have 100 the same, where it's too big for the small ones, too small for the large ones. So the default of variation is a superior default in a contemporary condition, if you can build it, and so that will imprint itself. So you have a grid which is soft, which squeezes here and inflates here. And yet you wanted continuous lines. All lines continue instead of hierarchizing it. So what's so great about Manhattan is that you have so many options, so many avenues to run up and down, and streets to cross over, and not like Dubai or Beijing, one spine where everything piles in, and then cul-de-sac kind of condition. So some of these techniques of grids and so on, but it had to be a soft grid, a grid which delivers variation. And then also has continuities. We have this kind of overall envelope which ties things together, which also matches up scale of footprint with height. And so you have these kind of laws of ordering, and it looks relatively, I mean, I don't know, I don't think it's garbage spilled to the same extent like everywhere else. Maybe it's still garbage spilled.
I'd like to ask you a bit more about the design process.
Okay.
These large buildings. And I think what we were talking about earlier, the parametric semiology, is a way of space finding, if we could say, and how. And on the other hand, how do you define the shape of a building? If you're working from inwards to outwards to create space, ideally, as you were saying, you would end up with something that is porous and fat rather than long and tall. And when we work with skyscrapers, unfortunately, we need to work with the thin and tall. How do you address the form? Is it the structural integrity that addresses the form? As you were saying, the structure shouldn't affect the inside organization. How do you design separately from outwards inwards and inwards outwards, and there's a line where this meets?
Yeah, that's pretty much, you're quite right. What is nice about the new tools, so for instance, the sites are not necessarily greenfield sites. So you might come in and you have already several levels, or there might be something like in the Lisa Tower, there's a train going through underneath. So you're already starting with an asymmetric footing. Then you might have a bridge coming in on one side, or you have an auditorium here and something else there, and so you're loading it up asymmetrically. Now, that's interesting, and what contemporary structural engineering can cope with that. And you can do a topology optimization and resolve that, and it will look elegant and balanced, because it does do that. So that will already impact the skeleton form and the exterior. you know, also when you have columns, but you want a big entrance at the bottom, they have to be kind of channeled. You get an overall sense of more filigree and light at the top, and more heavy and weight, you know, loads accumulate, but also horizontal wind load accumulate massively in an exponential way. So you get a different kind of thickness, and then when you're moving up, and that then will also allow you to order the different functions into that. They're fit into different parts, and the kind of middle, the bottom, middle, and top of tower, they're differently articulated through structure, and then as you correlate what you now can do with these structured spaces, you fit in with these, and you enhance differentiation, because you start with the differentiation, and then you, for instance, in our Miami Tower, the skeleton gets more lightweight as you go up. So, and we're also going from more smaller apartments to lesser and lesser, than 3, then 2, then 1 apartment. And that you see that in the balcony, and it's the only way. You don't need so many columns anymore, and you have a large span balcony, and the column splits at the corner at the top. So it shows something going on, and there's a transformation, and there's different programs, and it's not just everything stuffed behind one wallpaper, behind one grid. You get more clues. There's enhances legibility, let's say, of this. And if there was stronger asymmetries or events happening in the structure, the structure would accommodate them. And the way the structure accommodates them exhibits and makes visible. Similar in horizontal structure, you could have a big hall, and someone naturally, if you would do proper structural engineering, you either use a shell or you have deeper beams. They would indicate 2 things. First of all, in which direction is the shortest pathway you would span. Let's say you're in a big space and it's obscured by partitions in a big exhibition fair or something, but you have the ceiling to orient. The ceiling can tell you which is the direction of longest axis, where's the center of the space, maybe where is a big opening which radiates through the structure because there's less support, so the members have to do something else. That would naturally lead you to every action as a reaction to, if you're systematically scripting consequences, you can backtrack from the consequences to the event, and that's what I call inference capacity. Naturally coming, if you work parametrically, you get an artifact which has a lot of inference information. So it's information rich.
That's actually a very logical, when you see the building, you see why things are in a certain way.
And it helps you to orient, to find these things, to know where you are within it. I mean, if you're in a kind of isotropic grid, you lose total sense where you are. I mean, if you live in a London row house, every day you have to concentrate. Where is my house? And you have, seriously, I mean, I've lived like this. I mean, it takes concentration. They're all identical. You know, you don't have other kind of symmetry breaking clues, and you can just, oh God, I've passed by my own house again. So that is friction, right? So let's say, lack of information, which is either chaos, which has no information, or isotropic repetition. They're both on the side of zero information. Then you need to GPS to your destination. You're looking at your phone and on your blue dot, and you're missing out everything on the way. That's also a problem. So the point is really you have to be able to kind of intuitively navigate, get the clues where you have to go, where you'll be, while taking in a lot of the contingent information and the people you want to observe, and you don't panic and looking at your dot and you've passed by the entrance and you're missing everything you came for and you feel frustrated and isolated.
So ideally, no matter how tall or wide a building is, the inside experience, it should be intuitive. It's like walking through a forest.
Absolutely,
you imagine that there's something there because it's there.
Exactly. The clearing announces itself, or the natural environment is like this. If you had a mountain range, you can guess where the river is. You notice north face of the mountains different from the south face in terms of flora, and the fauna sits in. it becomes more sparse and more rocky, and then cold and snowy, and you know where you are. I mean, it's so rich of lawful differentiation, and that's precisely what parameterism would deliver, where every system, everything element is scripted according to rules upon everything else. Everything connects and becomes, in a sense, a mapping, a function of each other, and therefore an information about each other. I mean, you have to remember, very stupid animals find their way and survive in these environments because they can go by some. They know where they should expect the water. Well, they have information, but let them loose in a garbage spill. Let them loose in a garbage spill, and they have nothing to go by, and they will.
The signals are there.
There's nothing, you know. Yeah, and if animals can do it, we can also do it.
So if that's the way we would, ideally design the inside of the space, then it sounded like the outside is more addressed by the climate, the environmental.
No, but the outside is exactly the same. So what I mean is the outside, the city should be like this.
Okay.
City both out in the urban spaces and the outside appearance. So you're homing in on the center. You just drawn along. Let's say the center, it probably usually is. You sometimes get these kind of field conditions where you're thrown in. Let's say you imagine you're thrown or you're lost. There was a taxi driver at a fight. He's dropping you. Which direction do I walk? I mean, there might be a sense where you see something. This build-up height is here, but also seems shops occurring a bit more often here, and here there's the next. So you can kind of navigate. You can be pulled by vectors of transformation. It's a bit like a bacteria moving up a nutrition gradient. They only have to have the local transformation. That's why gradients are quite important, where you're drawn towards something, and topography helps you as well, So to exploit these lawful transformations for intuitive navigation and wayfinding, then you also don't have to. You just have to find some kind of point of urbanity where you expect certain things. If things are particular, oftentimes yes, they do cluster. I mean, the functioning, unless there's the political paralysis goes too far, so things can't cluster. So, but they do. I mean, to some extent, despite all the prohibitions, there's a certain functional rationality in the way things aggregate. So one thing tells you about something else might also be around. There's a way, not enough of that, but also then the physiognomy of this is the signals are kind of very, very noisy and unreliable. And
I'm forced to bring the conversation back to skyscrapers, but okay, I imagine that's quite difficult to do with skyscrapers.
No, skyscraper. Skyscrapers. We're losing years. Skyscrapers, this landmark function of orientation. What is good about skyscrapers, cities with skylines and the elevation, that you also see into the distance. You see the layering of the city. You see. And you can walk. I mean, I'm walking through all of London, whether, from East London to Centre and to West End and into Knightsbridge and so on and so forth. So that's good that there's an elevational communication. So that's the advantage of tall buildings. That they radiate their presence and you can use them. And that's why, for instance, it's also important that the tower is not looking exactly the same from all sides. So in our tower in Iraq, it looks very different from south to the north, east, west. So this can really function as a landmark. Otherwise, in New York, you're thrown in. If you might not know on which side of the Empire State Building you are. And it's hard to remember in New York to keep track. You're going into a shop, you come out, shit. Which way is north? I mean, what's good? There's already symmetry breaking, avenue versus streets. So, north or south is here. It's not like, oh God, it's not either north, south, west, or east. But still, you don't know which way is north, which one is south. If our tower was there, or all the towers were parametrically sensitive to environmental parameters like sun exposure, you would always, on an overcast day, know where's south, where's west.
The building would be a direct reflection of the different things that happen on the floor.
It would also, it would be sensitive to sun orientation.
I am conscious of the time. We've been asked to
Yeah,
limit
no
it in 1
problem.
hour.
No problem.
If I could just ask one more question.
Sure.
So going back to this, our favorite topic of skyscrapers.
Okay. Well, no problem. Look, we're working when we have about, I read a design article, look at the next 10 Zaha towers on the way.
Mhm.
I mean, they're coming, we're doing them. I mean, we're doing an interesting one in Shenzhen, which is twin tower with a lot of bridges and atria and bleeding out, very, very deep at the ground, atria as well. So that's an example. Tower C, Shenzhen, of what we mean when we say the new tower typology.
I think when we were talking about the different ways of form finding and space
Yeah.
creating, it seems that the outside parameters, if I could say parameters,
Sure.
the environment, the sun exposure, all of this lives in a different time scale than what happens on the inside, as in the creative companies, the workers, maybe the companies change, maybe the way people change.
Yeah.
So the time scale at which these things evolve is quite different.
Yeah, but don't forget the outside, it's not only environmental, it's all the other buildings which motivate you to come with your new building. So they should be reflected.
Okay.
And you make connections with them, visual affiliations, similarity relations, maybe orientations, alignment, gestures, all of that will be the exterior. You will network into actual bridges. For instance, they have a sky lobby at level 25. You decide to put your sky lobby exactly on level 25. And then somebody else comes and puts also their sky lobby. So these are the exterior relations. They're not on our minds because that's not the way the city functions, for the reasons I mentioned, political paralysis and architectural incompetency.
And when when we use parametricism, tectonicism to design both the outside and inside of the building, and the inside parameters change faster than the outside parameters. And it seems like the great thing about especially the agent-based parametric semiology is that you can really kind of curate to exactly what is needed in that situation. And I guess my question is, does that create a kind of rigidity, or is there a way to keep that?
Well, and it's a very good question. I mean, always face this. And as I said, there's a degree of tailoring and for cooperation, which will flourish for another 30 years. That is important to do that tailoring. And then you can say, well, what have conditions change? How fast do they change? You can adjust here. There's another inflexible elements. So there's a hierarchy of ephemerality, let's say. So that's why I said occupiable surfaces should not be tied in with structural stability. So you can pop in and pop out floors. The composition is open-ended. You can add another layer. You can take every second floor, whatever you'd like to do. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you had, like I said with the 100 different block, we don't know what you can even have a better default than the repetition default is the variation default. So that maintains one corporation moving out, another corporation moving in. They're starting with the differentiation, for instance, different floor heights or different depth, different situations of meeting and workspaces, and then they can self-sort. So instead of everything has to go into one stereotypical thing, which is super flexible, it also has no. So you can, if you had 100 different variations and you have 100 departments, you can match up. So the variation default is a better default. That maintains. That is, even if these guys move out, another knowledge economy comes in, they would still benefit from these more rational defaults. Then on top of that, you get this kind of refitting. You can also add a bridge. You buy the building next door and plug a bridge in between these two, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. So I think that's the answer.
Okay. Thank you. Can I just ask one last very light question? What is the next step for
Well-
Sunrise? And also, we know that you also space design in the virtual worlds now. So both in the physical world and the virtual
Very
world.
important. You're quite right. I mean, the one thing is for the virtual world has exactly the same topics because we're working for the same knowledge economy,
Mhm.
very similar agendas. How do you integrate thousands of people to make them inter-aware, collaborative? How do you go into space and participate quickly in many different situations? You go in, you go here and see many other things which could interest you.
Mhm.
Re-synergizing of and collecting into cities, into big buildings. So it's a full-on directly competing. So virtual conferencing competes with physical conference center. We might be every meeting is, but the other thing is also every meeting is hybrid. We're working both virtually and physically, and that will be reflected. So the physical space should have windows into the virtual world. These screens will get ever more large. The whole wall, a panoramic wall, and the way and the physical space is designed together with virtual spaces. So it will also change the physical space because you want to have seamless integration. I call it kind of cyber urban integration, or this kind of fidget interfacing. So it's an interesting topic. We're doing a metaverse called Metatopia, which is purely virtual, but we also have clients where we want to promote, use the virtual as an anticipation of the physical, but then it continues. You can use it anyway, and so yeah, it's a big story. And I think the physical environment will be influenced first of all by seamlessly interfacing and becoming an interface into virtual environments, so that we're not sitting at home on a small screen, but we're sitting together in a cave which projects us into virtual worlds while being together physically as well. That should be absorbed by the architecture. And but I think you also expect that when we develop the virtual world, you can see we don't have all the constraints. We have information overlays, we have augmentation, we have a semiology, and that spills over. So I think there will be influences coming in the design of the physical. Because we maybe designed the virtual first, and now we want the physical becomes a kind of facilitation of that interface into that. So we're strongly influenced by the virtual. But the important thing is it's architect's domain. We shouldn't say, oh, this is just, this is graphic designer's work. No, it's our work now because the internet becomes our domain. Used to be the graphic designer's domain. It's an enormous avalanche of work. That's why we need parametricism, algorithmic design, procedural design, AI design to cope with the amount of design we need to create, because this is what every single organization which has a premise will have multiple virtual spaces. Every single firm or entity or organization which has a website will have virtual spaces. They will be changing much faster than physical spaces. So the amount of design work which comes us is an unbelievable avalanche. We are well prepared for it. And for all the young architects, it's going to be great. And they can make a name of themselves and then also develop physical things. But the discipline is, and that I think will shift the discipline, because whatever I can see in the metaverse, parametrism is key. Most metaverses have parametrism design. It's these kind of younger firms who don't have a track record. It's unencumbered. So parametrism will rule the metaverse. AI architecture, it's all parametrism, 80%. So you can see what people want to do if they could, if they had the facility, if they had the freedom. That's what they want. So we are winning. We are winning through AI, through metaverse. Finally, parametrism has to come, because it's not something arbitrary. It's not something artificial. It is the really kind of the conclusion of applying the computational revolution and telecommunication repertoires and science, both in its means of addressing problems, but also in the problems that are newly posed through this. And we bring the same kind of thing which have shifted the way we want to, what we want to do in environments. It shifts the way we create these environments. And this will be the hegemonic epochal style of the 21st century, because whatever that is, it is going to be in this direction. And that's when it has so many rich, versatile solution space to explore. There's nothing prescribed, but it's clear that it is still recognizable look and feel, because it will be more adaptive, varied, more organic, integrated, and it won't be minimalism, it won't be postmodernism, it won't be garbage spill. So it will be whatever it is. It's a very kind of broad trajectory, but it must come, and it will come, and I see it coming.
Okay. And is there space for, or is there need for skyscrapers in the virtual world?
To some extent, yes. I think there will be. We need also the elevational density, that height, and there it's easy. You can fly. You can kind of connect across these sky lobbies and look down, looking up. I mean, but the three-dimensionality, at least. I'm not sure it needs to be super tall and narrow, but you should have something above, below, all around in layers, 360-degree, and to just make something only in front is not going to be sufficient. It's starts getting obscured. You need to stagger things. So it's to make it, at your fingertips, and you want to navigate the web, not scroll the menu, typing things, and you only therefore jump to things you remember the name of. That's very kind of limiting. The internet experience spatialized along the metaphor of the city rather than the metaphor of the magazines can be much more compelling, and it's going to be much more real time. And so you can also then collectively move around and look at something together, and then it's going to be effective. I'm excited about it, and I have no prejudice. Physical better than virtual. For me, it's my competency. What kind of boosts the human project, the prosperity engine, to make us all freer and easygoing and more comfortable and more productive. That's what I go by, whatever it is. And for me, they're 100% fitting the, let's say, every interaction and collaboration and communication has a kind of some kind of spatial morphological setting. We're sitting here now, and we're using everything we touch and see has been provided by a designer. But also when you open your phone, that interface, the piece itself, all digital has some kind of spatial framing. And then when we do, the graphic design, starts with the grid of apps, totally dysfunctional, by the way, because you look at it. I mean, can you find your app?
Really?
No, you can't, because too many. It's visual chaos. You have to type, or you swipe, and you sometimes I swipe 5 times, and you can't see the app. So graphic design is bankrupt. They haven't learned pragmatism. They don't know the semiology, phenomenology. So they're colleagues. So everything anybody ever does, the total physiognomy, let's say, of your life, designers always framing with dressing up for a purpose. Semiology, fitting yourself into expressively fitting yourself into kind of very complex matrix of socialities and distinctions, and who you want to be and who you want to be for that purpose, and this and that. This is going to be a huge thing in the metaverse as well, but also the settings, how you hosting, who you're inviting, who you want to see, that they recognize, how they configured, how they settle in, what's the mood, how they're primed for the situation that's coming, bright light, versus low light levels. I mean, this is accident. A little bit. So the problem is, so I've written about this, 250 articles, thousands of pages. If anyone would care to learn, 200 YouTube lectures, but it's not. I feel a bit frustrated because it's, Japan is probably relatively disconnected in their own universe. So that's the hindrance, but I think it will eventually come through. That's I don't give.
We'll be looking forward to it. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions from your side?
Yeah, enough time.
Enough. Yeah, we already learned a lot. Thank you
Do you
so
think
much.
you have a lot?
Yeah,
The recording.
We can teach the Japanese audience about parametric. It's a big magazine.
You should. They should wake up and come out of the cocoon. Splendid self-isolation of Japan. No,
The bankruptcy.
I mean, you've been so at the forefront. You've been so kind of cutting edge and brilliant. And then, of course, America switched you off. I mean, it's tragic. Literally, they're becoming too brilliant that they have to switch off. And our projects, which were in Tokyo at that period, 1990, we dug out, they were under construction, build them back up, finished, no more, all our stuff disappeared. Anyway,
Yeah.
I like you. You've been very, very smart and very kind of congenial, and I really liked the interview. And let's see what
Thank you very much.
any kind of
Thank you very much.
We